Tasmania is special, and not simply because it's Australia's only island state. As a travel journalist, I wanted to see just what it is that has made Tasmania a major tourist destination. This film is about a 10-day fly-drive tour that I did with my husband and my baby daughter. I'm surprised when it will show you some of the places we went to, where we stayed, and some of the things we did and saw. We picked up our car at Hobart Airport, complete with a bag full of maps and brochures. We headed southeast to the Tasman Peninsula and its famous coastal formations. The tessellated pavement looks man-made, but in fact it's a work of nature, formed by earth movements, wind and waves. The Tasmanian Devil is unique to the state, and the Devil Park is well worth a visit. Beware the highly territorial Cape Barren geese. The stars of the show look placid enough, but touching the devils is strictly for the experts, and we soon found out why.
Now, they're most renowned for their jaws and their bite. They've got the second most powerful set of jaws of any animal anywhere in the world, surpassed only by the jaws and bite of the great white shark. The reason the bite's so bad is that the bottom jaw is a quarter of an inch smaller than the top jaw. Therefore, it fits inside the top jaw with the edges of the cutting teeth actually rubbing together as the jaw closes down, just like a big double-edged pair of scissors. And probably the worst aspect of the animal's bite is once he's bitten, it's physically impossible for him to let go until whatever's in his mouth comes off in his mouth, be it an arm, a leg, whatever have you. Their native foods are carrion, any dead animal they happen to come across. They were nearly wiped out about 30 years ago because they used to take lambs and the various other things.
You can take a guided tour of the whole Tasman Peninsula, which includes the remarkable cave. Every tourist is shown the spot from which the cave mouth looks, remarkably, like a map of Tasmania. Our last stop of the day was the infamous convict settlement at Port Arthur. This place has a scale and a presence which haunts you. For all its tranquil beauty, the physical reality of the ruined prison stirs the hairs on the back of your neck. There are ghosts here. Among them the ghosts of 1,800 convicts who lie in mass graves on the Isle of the Dead, buried under quicklime. That night, we stayed at the Fox and Hounds near Port Arthur. Its mock Tudor atmosphere was charming in the restaurant, but mercifully absent from the rooms, which were modern and light. The following day, we headed north to Triabunna. The town is the starting point for the ferry to Maria Island, named after Anthony Van Diemen's wife. Triabunna was a whaling station in the early 19th century, and then a garrison town when Maria Island was established as a penal settlement. Most of the buildings date from the convict era, and some have been partially restored. You can buy a map at the ferry landing which identifies the buildings and gives a history of the island. Today, Maria Island is a national park, and its rich wildlife is all around you. If you want to camp overnight, all your food must be brought in with you. School parties use what were the prisoners' barracks. The convicts included 5 New Zealand Maoris, one of whom is buried here above the town. His crime was described as open rebellion against the Queen. Whether you just stay the couple of hours between ferries, as we did, or longer, Marai Island is a memorable experience. Off the Tasman Highway, a dirt road originally surveyed as a railway line leads to Coles Bay. The bay is at the foot of the Hazards, hills of solid red granite in the beautiful Freycinet National Park. Be warned, Coles Bay is poorly supplied with fresh food, so order it in advance. Coles Bay's self-contained villas are exactly that. Each unit has a kitchen that's very well equipped, and the bathroom has a small washing machine and laundry tub. All linen is provided, but instead of blankets, every bed has a continental quilt. They're light and warm, and I don't know why more places haven't thought of them before. Best of all, though, is the beautiful view you wake up to. On the 3rd day of our tour, we headed towards Launceston, with the East Coast living up to its reputation for the state's sunniest climate and some of its most varied scenery. At the seaside resort of St Helens, the road turns inland towards Scottsdale and some of the richest farmland in Tasmania. Our hotel, the Penny Royal, was a welcome sight after the long but beautiful drive to Launceston. Next door to the hotel is Penny Royal World. The collection of 19th century style mills, all in working order, makes a fascinating outing, especially for children who love it. Launceston is called the Garden City, and we could see why. Gardens like Prince's Square are a pleasure to walk in. Launceston is a good base for day trips. The Midland Highway travels south, through countryside rich in scenery and in a number of historic towns, like Ross. A lovely example of Tasmania's heritage. The main avenue of English trees makes a stately approach to the famous Ross Bridge. The bridge was convict built, and its carvings are unique in Tasmania. The next day, we drove west from Launceston to Deloraine, and there we took a detour to the Marakoopa Cave.
Now, it's 105 feet here to the surface, or approximately 32 metres, and this being one of the shallowest parts of the cave.
The National Parks and Wildlife Service offer guided tours several times a day through Marakoopa and nearby King Solomon's Cave. The first white men to find Marakoopa were two brothers in 1910 who were searching for lost cattle.
And looking out across there where the torch is shining, this is one of the largest individual scenes in the cave, known as Zambezi Waterfall or the Frozen Niagara. Limestone rock is a softish rock, and therefore with a continual action of water wears its way through and thus creates these large and spacious areas throughout.
Tasmania's northwest coast, beyond the busy centres of Devonport and Burnie, is Cape Country. Perhaps the best known of its jutting high cliffs is Table Cape. But surely the most spectacular must be at the town of Stanley, dominated by the massive circular headland known as the Nut. Here at Highfield, above the town of Stanley, were the original headquarters of the Van Diemen's Land Company, a 19th century pastoral company which opened up the northwest of the state. Ramshackle and deserted now, the house cries out for restoration. The neglect of Highfield contrasts with such historic buildings in the town itself as the Plough Inn, beautifully restored by its owners and open to the public. At the foot of the Nut is the childhood home of Joseph Lyons, the only Tasmanian to become Prime Minister of Australia. There is accommodation at Stanley, but we drove back to the picturesque village of Boat Harbour, a deservedly popular holiday resort. The Seaway Motel has been owned by the Robinson family for nearly 20 years. They've recently added a hydrotherapy and leisure centre with sauna, pool and spa.
Not many motels offer hydrotherapy for an extra $1 a day. The Seaway has a heated saltwater pool, and this spa water is from natural springs. The hydrotherapy is administered very gently. There's no diving or jumping into the pool allowed, and no running or shouting either. As far as I'm concerned, after a hard day's touring, that suits me just fine.
The 7th day of our tour found us going southwest to Zeehan. Behind me is the Gaiety, once Australia's largest legitimate theatre. That was in the days when Zeehan was known as the Silver City, between 1890 and 1910. In those days it was a mining boom town and boasted no less than 11 different railway companies and 26 pubs, of which just 2 remain. For the tourist, an idea of what mining means to the West Coast can be found here at the Pioneers Memorial Museum, once the School of Mines. One of the most popular exhibits is this working model of the Mount Bischoff tin mine. But the museum's pride and joy is its collection of minerals from all over the world. Their colours are bizarrely echoed in Queenstown's denuded hills. The devastation of the hills around Queenstown has been caused by a combination of logging, heavy rainfall, bushfires and mining operations. The startling landscape that has resulted has proved to be a major tourist attraction. So much so, in fact, that it's rumoured the locals pull up any green vegetation that appears sooner than lose the tourist trade. Queenstown doesn't really depend on tourists, however, but on the Mount Lyell Mining Company. If you have time, a tour of their vast open-cut mines is an awesome sight. In the 1890s, the mining companies built a network of railways to carry their ore to the coast at Strahan. The dirt road we took from Zeehan to Strahan was once a railway line. Now being developed as a highway, it's a scenic route, with a glimpse of Ocean Beach as you make the descent into Strahan. It's hard to believe this sleepy little harbour was Australia's busiest port in the first years of the mining boom. The Union Steamship Company's imposing building is a reminder of that golden age. Strahan is the departure point for full or half-day cruises of Macquarie Harbour and the Gordon River. We took the half-day cruise on the fast-moving catamaran, the James Kelly. The adult fare was $15 for the 3.5-hour trip, which includes a Devonshire tea. It isn't cheap, but in the time most tourists have available, it's one of the few ways of seeing the remote and beautiful Gordon River, the largest and the loneliest of the rivers that feed Macquarie Harbour. Macquarie Harbour is big enough to shelter the navies of the world, but its entrance is a narrow channel, known as Hell's Gates, for the fierce tides which sweep through the heads. The name dates back to 1821, when the most brutal of Tasmania's penal settlements was established in Macquarie Harbour on Sarah Island. The 11 years of its existence were ones of unremitting misery and cruelty. Most of the convicts who tried to escape died in the bush, and to this day skeletons and leg irons are still being found in the remote areas where they perished. Its fascinating past and the grandeur of its scenery made Strahan a highlight of our trip. Heading back towards Hobart the following day, we stopped at Mountfield National Park to admire the magnificent Russell Falls. Tasmania has always been rich in water. Not without controversy, much of it has been harnessed for power through the building of great dams and the creation of lakes like Lake Pedder, today a magnet for the trout fishermen. Salmon Ponds in the Derwent Valley is where you'll find the first brown and rainbow trout to be raised successfully in the southern hemisphere. We had to resist the temptation to reach out and catch our dinner. Further along the Derwent Valley, the landscape around New Norfolk is dominated by hop fields. And the Osthouse Museum offers a fascinating history of hop growing in the area. In the days before mechanised harvesting, hop picking was the central event of the year for the whole district. Our hotel that night was a real find. Wilmot Arms Inn is in Kempton, just north of Hobart. The 19th century coaching inn has been lovingly restored by its owners and offers a unique alternative to motels. There's no television, just a little light classical music in the parlour. Hobart itself, of course, offers the full range of accommodation, from the glamour of Rest Point to the convenience of centrally placed modern motels, to the economy and independence of the Sandy Bay Caravan Park, and we tried them all. Our van was well equipped and comfortable. Why don't we go down the Huon tomorrow, round here?
I've been everywhere else from that.
Yes. The broad peninsula south of Hobart is bound by the D'Entrecasteaux Channel to the east and the Huon River to the west. Closeness to Hobart and plenty to see make the Huon Valley a popular day trip. Oyster Cove Inn, near Kettering, was an ideal place for lunch. Our meal was delicious and inexpensive.
That's lovely. Just down the end there you can take a ferry to Bruny Island, apparently.
We were tempted to cross to Bruny Island, but simply didn't have time. I guess you can't see everything. The Huon River Valley is the centre of Tasmania's orcharding industry, and we couldn't visit Tasmania without seeing the fruit that gives it the name the Apple Isle. Australia's oldest Catholic church and road bridge are both here in Richmond, and both convict built. The jail is 5 years older than Port Arthur. No amount of flowers in the pretty courtyard can disguise the harsh realities of the past. I tried one of the solitary cells, but I didn't stay long. Buildings still standing from the 1820s have been converted into galleries and tea shops. Richmond is barely half an hour's drive from Hobart and well worth the visit. We started our tour of Hobart and the last day of our fly drive holiday with a drive to the summit of Mount Wellington. The views are magnificent, but a seemingly clear day can be deceptive. Oh well, if you're above the cloud line, you certainly know you're on top of a mountain, and that's half the fun. Hobart is Australia's second oldest city and has many beautifully preserved colonial buildings. The main block of Parliament House was convict built, as was Customs House behind Constitution Dock. The dock was named to mark the colony's transition to government under its own constitution, but is better known today for its seafood and the end of the annual Sydney-Hobart yacht race. Battery Point, a few minutes' drive from the heart of the city, was Hobart's first residential area. The homes of whalers and merchants of 150 years ago are still here, today housing antique shops and restaurants. It's a charming area to stroll in. The sandstone warehouses of Salamanca Place date back to the 1830s. It must be the prettiest waterfront street in Australia. The craft shops and the weekly market were marvellous for buying presents to take home with us. Or we could be entertained while we shopped in the city centre in Cat and Fiddle Arcade. White settlement of Tasmania didn't begin here in Hobart at all. It began across the river at Risdon Cove, where today there's a memorial park to Lieutenant John Bowen, who landed here in 1803 with a small party of soldiers. This is where the settlement of Van Diemen's Land began, and where our tour ends. We'd had 10 days of living history and incomparable scenery. It wasn't long enough. We'll be back. Tasmania really is the treasure island.